As the afternoon rush filled the subway station, a group of bikers rolled in, their roaring laughter and rowdy energy drawing all eyes their way. They were the type that thrived on intimidation, pushing their weight around and feeding off the unease of everyone in their path. Most commuters wisely kept their distance, avoiding eye contact and silently hoping not to be their next target. But one man didn't budge. Sitting quietly on a bench, his posture calm and collected, was a middle-aged veteran. His weathered face carried the stories of battles fought and won, his sharp eyes assessing the situation without a hint of fear. When the bikers turned their attention to him, they thought they'd found easy prey. They had no idea who they were dealing with. What happened next would leave everyone in the station speechless, and the bikers regretting their mistake. The veteran didn't flinch as the bikers swaggered closer, their voices growing louder, their taunts laced with cocky confidence. Most people would have stood up, backed away, or at least looked nervous, but he sat there like he had all the time in the world. It wasn't arrogance, just a quiet, unshakable calm. One of the bikers, a tall guy with a chain hanging from his belt, leaned in, grinning. "What's the matter, old man? Cat got your tongue." He cheered, his friends laughing behind him. The veteran slowly looked up, his eyes locking onto the bikers. There was something in his gaze, steady, piercing, that instantly silenced the laughter. It wasn't anger or fear. It was the look of someone who'd been through things these guys couldn't begin to understand. People around the station began to notice the tension building, and you could feel the air shift. Something big was about to happen. The biker with the chain smirked, sensing an audience forming. He tapped his boot against the ground, a mocking rhythm, as if daring the veteran to make a move. "You deaf? I'm talking to you," he said, his tone sharper now. The veteran didn't rise to the bait. Instead, he leaned back slightly, his calm demeanor unwavering. "I heard you," he replied, his voice low but firm, cutting through the noise like a blade. The crowd, drawn by the growing commotion, stayed at a cautious distance, curious but nervous about what might happen next. Some whispered, others glanced toward the exit, debating whether to step in or step away. Another biker, shorter but stockier, chimed in. "What's with the tough act, Grandpa? Think you can take us all on?" he sneered. The veteran's lips curved into a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "You'd be surprised what I can do," he said quietly. That simple response seemed to shift the mood entirely. The bikers exchanged uncertain glances, and for the first time, a flicker of doubt crossed their faces. Still, they didn't back down. They had reputations to uphold, and this wasn't the kind of man they'd planned to lose face against. But what they didn't know, what no one there knew, was the story behind those calm eyes. Years of training, discipline, and survival had shaped this man into someone who didn't need to shout or show off to prove his strength. And if push came to shove, he was more than ready. The tension in the air was electric now, every person in the station holding their breath as the confrontation escalated. The lead biker took a step closer, now just inches from the veteran, towering over him. "You think you're funny, old man," he growled, his voice low but edged with frustration. The veteran didn't answer right away. He shifted slightly on the bench, his hands resting casually on his knees. He wasn't looking for trouble, but it was clear he wouldn't back down either. "I think you've got a choice to make," he said finally, his tone steady but layered with meaning. That answer wasn't what the bikers expected. Their leader laughed, but it was nervous, almost forced. "A choice? How about I show you what happens when you mess with us?" He shot back, his hand reaching toward the chain at his belt. The crowd collectively tensed, some even gasping, unsure if this was about to spiral out of control. But the veteran stayed rooted in place, his calm composure only making the bikers more uneasy. "You don't want to do that," the veteran said, his voice so calm it was almost eerie. There was no fear in his eyes, only an unnerving certainty that made even the boldest biker hesitate. One of the bikers muttered under his breath, "Something's off about this guy." But their leader shrugged it off, unwilling to let his ego take a hit. "Nah, he's just bluffing," he said, his confidence wavering but still intact. The veteran rose slowly to his feet, his movements deliberate and controlled. He wasn't a large man, but the way he carried himself made him seem 10 feet tall. The bikers unconsciously stepped back, their bravado cracking under the weight of his silent confidence. The station grew impossibly quiet, the only sounds the distant hum of an approaching train and the faint rustle of the wind. All eyes were locked on the scene, waiting for what would happen next. As the veteran stood, the leader of the bikers clenched his fists, his false bravado faltering. The room felt like it was holding its breath, and even the approaching train seemed to slow, as if it too was waiting to see what would happen next. But just as the tension peaked, the unexpected happened. A young woman, wearing a subway employee uniform, stepped out from the crowd and positioned herself between the veteran and the bikers. Her voice was firm but measured. "That's enough," she said, her eyes scanning the group of bikers. The leader smirked, clearly amused. "You think you're gonna stop us?" he said, glancing back at his crew for validation. But the woman didn't waver. "This man has done more for people like you than you'll ever know," she replied, her words cutting through the room. The bikers exchanged uncertain glances, their confidence cracking further. Then the veteran spoke, his voice calm but tinged with a new intensity. "Listen to her," he said, his gaze never leaving the leader. "This isn't about me or you. It's about knowing when to walk away." Before anyone could respond, the distant sound of heavy boots echoed through the station. A second later, a small group of military personnel appeared, casually walking toward the platform. They were laughing and chatting, seemingly unaware of the tension in the air. But the sight of them caused the bikers to freeze. The leader's eyes darted from the veteran to the soldiers, and suddenly the weight of the situation began to sink in. This wasn't just a random guy at a subway station. This was someone who commanded respect in ways they hadn't anticipated. The crowd, sensing the shift, watched with bated breath, waiting to see if the bikers would dare to escalate things, or if they'd finally realize they were in way over their heads. The leader of the bikers stood frozen, his bravado crumbling under the pressure. He glanced nervously at the soldiers, then back at the veteran, as if trying to calculate his next move. The veteran didn't say a word. He didn't have to. His calm, steady presence was louder than any threat. Finally, the leader let out a forced laugh, throwing his hands up. "All right, old man," he said, stepping back. "We'll let you off easy this time." His voice tried to sound cocky, but it was clear to everyone that he was backing down. The other bikers hesitated before following his lead, muttering under their breaths as they retreated. The tension in the air began to lift, and the crowd let out a collective sigh of relief. The young woman turned to the veteran, a look of admiration on her face. "Thank you," she said quietly. But just as the bikers reached the station's exit, one of them paused and turned back. He wasn't the leader, just one of the quieter ones who'd hung back during the confrontation. "Wait," he said, his voice uncertain. "Who are you?" The veteran finally broke his silence, his eyes meeting the bikers. "Just someone who knows when to stand up and when to stand down," he replied. As the bikers disappeared into the street, the soldiers, now aware of what had happened, approached the veteran. They exchanged knowing nods, a silent acknowledgement shared between those who've served. One of them clapped the veteran on the shoulder. "Still got it, huh?" The veteran allowed himself a small smile before turning back to the young woman. "Take care of yourself," he said, his voice kind but firm. Then, without another word, he picked up his bag and stepped onto the train, leaving the station behind as the crowd watched in quiet awe. As the train pulled away, the young woman noticed something on the bench where the veteran had been sitting. A small patch with a faded emblem, the kind only earned through years of service. She picked it up, her eyes widening as she realized its significance. He wasn't just a veteran, he was a legend. And in that moment, the lesson he'd left behind resonated deeply. Strength isn't about proving yourself to others. It's about knowing who you are. As the train disappeared down the tunnel, the station slowly returned to its usual rhythm. The crowd began to disperse, but the mood lingered, an unspoken sense of respect for the man who had just left. The young woman held the patch tightly in her hand, her mind racing with thoughts. She didn't know his name, but she didn't need to. His actions spoke louder than words. He had diffused the tension not with force, but with wisdom and quiet strength, leaving everyone there with a lesson they wouldn't soon forget. Outside, the bikers walked away in silence, their earlier bravado replaced by something they hadn't felt in a long time: humility. For once, they had encountered someone they couldn't intimidate, someone who reminded them that real power doesn't need to shout. And as the veteran's train rolled on, he stared out the window, a faint smile crossing his face. Another day, another lesson left behind.